I'm your host, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business owners. Hello, humans. I am your host, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business. I talk with sales and HR experts, other small business owners, and anyone else that can provide you with information to clear your way to success. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different. It's the first episode of, I don't have a name for it yet, but we're just going to go with like an expert discussion. And today's focus is HR. Hiring, interviewing, onboarding, management, culture, all of those things. I don't know how much we're actually going to get to, but we'll see. We'll see what we can actually cover. So my guest today is Stephanie Masters, owner of Stephanie Masters Consulting, and as of very recently, Nonprofit Sidekick. Stephanie graduated from Towson University with a Bachelors in Art Education, which kind of surprised me. That's something that I wanted to dive into a little bit, but we'll get to that on the next one. She spent 5 years as an activities director at a long-term care facility before transitioning to a staffing management position at a staffing agency. This is where it appears the HR focus kind of begins. She advanced in that company up to a branch manager, eventually moved to a training lead at a relatively large bank, and spent the next nearly 15 years working in training and development for various banking institutions, universities, technology and brand consulting firms. In 2017, Steph finally decided to branch out on her own, starting Stephanie Masters Consulting. She assists businesses with recruiting, hiring, onboarding, career growth, leadership development, and probably more than that. But in this year, July, so super recently, Stephanie and her business partner opened Nonprofit Sidekick, which focuses on supporting nonprofits. She's certified in Franklin Covey Time Management, Gallup Strengths, Loominger Voices 360, Predictive Index Talent Optimization, and a ton of other ones. You can click on her LinkedIn down below and see the rest. So a little backstory before we get going. So I kept hearing your name come up, but never actually ran into you until I took interest in the job at the CDC. So prior to that, my view of anything HR related was not the most positive, for sure. I don't know.
Typical.
Yeah, the term human resources, it didn't feel like that category really like lived up to the name. Felt like everything was just payroll and things like that. But after kind of working or like interacting with you, it kind of changed my view. And at least from the employee perspective, it like a focus on actually like the human resources feels like such a differentiator. Like it feels like that's an area where like from the employee side, it actually feels like whatever the organization is actually cares about your growth and about your future. So I just thought it would be, obviously I'd like to hear more about it. So, and I'd like to talk through some of that. So, Steph, thanks for being a guest on Clearing the Way. We'll see what all we can cover today, but, kind of a long intro, but did I miss anything there?
No, you didn't. And thank you so much for the opportunity to sit down and talk to you about human resources.
Yeah, I don't know. It's one of those like important things that also, it feels like the easiest thing to overlook when you're working as a small business owner. Like, yeah. I don't know. It just doesn't, it feels like the last of the priorities. Like, you got to get your finances right. You got to get your, like the process, you got to get a lot of things right, but hiring is like, I don't know. It feels like easy, Oh, this is easy.
Yeah. Everyone just thinks, all I need to do is post a position and hire a person and everything will be fine.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously it's not that easy. So let's start. My idea for today is to kind of work through the hiring process as much as we can. Obviously, we may have to cut some of it short, but from deciding to, hey, I need to bring somebody on, and what needs to happen, and all the way up to making the hire. So through the interview process, I'm sure I'll miss some things, but let's kind of work through that process. So I'm a business owner. I'm making the decision. I am ready to hire. what are some things, and most of your, let's take a step back first. Are most of the people that you're working with the smaller businesses, or, I know you have worked with those. So like, yeah, who generally are you working with?
I work with really small businesses that may have less than 10 employees, and then I can work with organizations that have up to thousands. So
Okay.
and especially in our area, the amount of entrepreneurs and people who are developing these great business ideas, those are the ones that, both for-profit and nonprofit, that I like to focus on.
Okay.
It's exciting. It's exciting to see businesses grow.
Yeah. Okay, so with the, so let's just, we'll kind of not role play, but kind of. So I'm looking to hire. I think I need more people. What are some things or some indicators that I am ready to hire, and that it is a good idea for me to actually start bringing on people? I'll kind of leave it there for now. Like, what are some of those things I should be looking for to know, hey, you might want to bring somebody on, or you can bring somebody on to help alleviate some of your stress?
Yeah. So I think that there has to be a dual approach to look at. First, do you have a sustainable need? And are you at a financial place to be able to bring on someone? Because it's not just the cost of the salary, but you also have to consider insurance. You have to consider the taxes.
Yeah.
All of the different benefits. And then, the overhead in terms of resources, phone, space, all of that. So, there's a lot.
When you're when you're looking at those things, what are the benefits to, and this may be different from case to case, but what would be the positives of hiring rather than just continuing to use contracted employee or contractors or some of those types of like freelancers, some of those types of things? What do you think the biggest reasons to lean more towards hiring, or not? Like, what are some of the differences there?
So when you hire someone who's freelance, or you hire a consultant, they're not a part of the organization, so there could be outside influences that they have competing contracts, they have different information, or different focus, and they don't have as much skin in the game as hiring somebody internally, somebody who is hired to be a part of the organization and to create a brand and have that consistency.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you seen, like, are there types of businesses that work better for just contracting that you've seen, or versus, like, obviously if you have a storefront, like, it's going to be a little difficult to just contract people to be working in there. But have you seen which types of businesses do tend to lean more towards contracting, or who it may be more beneficial to contract?
I think those that have cyclical work, where there are times that the workload may be significantly higher. So retail is notorious for having seasonal employees. And then within different organizations, those that may have more in the summertime because of tourism, or kids are out of school, or those around the holidays where you need that extra support. So contracting is great to fill, hopefully, either a seasonal need or cyclical need.
Okay.
But it's probably not a great long-term solution, because consultants cost more money eventually than an employee.
Do they, with all of the things, with all of the extras that like, if it's a full-time employee, like, is there an easy way to determine? I mean, I'm sure case by case there is, but at what point is it worth, I assume the extra overhead, like you talked about, like, there's a pretty big difference there, I would assume, right?
There is, but so there's two different types of contractors. So you could have somebody who's a 1099 who is an independent contractor, where their rate is probably a little bit lower than using an agency. An agency, you're probably going to pay anywhere from 30 to 50% more per hour or for the contract. So those costs are built in. So over time, what you'll see
You're
is
just
that
passing that cost on to the agency.
They pass it on to you anyway.
Yeah. And so then I guess there you're looking at, if you're hiring freelancers, that can be cheaper long term, but you've got to go through the process to vet all of those. So you're adding time there. And the management, like you mentioned, like they can bounce all over the place.
And is your organization always the priority?
Yeah, probably, unless you're paying the most or you have the best environment, you're probably not going to be, because they're freelancers.
Yes.
Which is fine. Like that's the benefit of being a freelancer and using freelancers. But if you're not the most important, then so we've got we've made the decision. An employee is now, they're the best. We need this. We've determined. Actually, how do you recommend determining if you're at the point too high? Like, is there an easy way to look at, I've got this much work coming in the future, and I need employees? Does that make sense? Like, at what point? How overwhelmed do I need to be before? It's like, hey, maybe I can bring somebody on and this is sustainable.
Pretty overwhelmed. So if you start to see that business is suffering, that you're having to say no, not now, your attention to detail, or maybe the quality of the work that you're trying to accomplish is being negatively impacted, that's when you want to start looking at hiring. And then you have to determine, is this somebody that I need full-time, part-time, and then what need are they going to fill? So if you're the primary and you are leading the charge and looking at what your primary functions are, that's where you have to start to extract out functions and responsibilities for other people to take on. And that's where I think so many small business owners make this assumption, well, I'll just hire someone and I'll just train them on what they need to do from what I do. And then there can be a lot of confusion, there can be a lot of overlap, and there's this lack of distinction of responsibilities of who owns something versus somebody who manages it.
Okay, so now we're kind of getting to prior to hiring, is it generally a good idea to kind of map out maybe all of the responsibilities or all of the tasks that need to be, or all of the things that need done, and then saying, here are the things where I either don't want to do these anymore or I'm falling short on? Like, is that generally, like, obviously we're speaking very broadly here, but is that generally like a good idea to, before I've hired, like, I need to know what I actually need a person for?
Yes. So what you would want to do is create a job description. And the job description should provide an overview of what they are to the organization and to the client, the patron, the customer, and then outline the core responsibilities, additional duties. And you always want to add in that there's going to be more to the job than you can list in the job description.
Yeah.
Because as you grow, you just don't know.
Yeah. Well, and there might be some things that, like, each employee, you don't know what they're actually capable of beforehand. And then you make those discoveries and it's like, oh, wait, well, how about let's pass this off to you, or however that expands. But okay, so when you're for these, okay, so we're on a job description here. What is there like an avenue that's been a little bit more successful or more recommended with, like, do a lot of small businesses choose to fill roles that they're not good at or that they don't have time for? Like, how are most people hiring, or how should you kind of look at hiring? Like, does that kind of make sense? Like, what should you be trying to fill first?
So what you're talking about is role definition. So in role definition, It's probably a combination of everything that you just mentioned.
Okay.
So we should always play to our strengths and recognize that as small business owners, what do we do really well? What are the things that we have to do? And then what are the things that other people could take on and do much more of a thorough job than we can. That's the combination of what you want to look at is what's going to drive the business? What are the things that that this person can help alleviate, and what can they take over?
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. So really, I mean, it's super important to have a really good grasp on all the things that you're doing. Like, you got to have that.
And it's always good to get outside input. And so that doesn't necessarily mean hiring an HR consultant, but having conversations with your most trusted network and saying, this is where I am with my business. This is what I'm thinking about. Because often when we're so close to it, it's really hard for us to see some of those needs that are our blind spots.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. I think that came up recently in another episode. Just like, you gotta either take a step back or have somebody else looking. Mm-hmm. And like you said, you don't have to hire somebody. Like, just get some good friends. Like, yeah. Like a couple good friends or people who have at least some view. And it might not be one person. It might be a group of people. It's like, hey, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? Or you hire somebody. But if, depending on the part, where you're at in your business, that might not be possible. Okay. So we've determined, here's the things I'm either not good at, or maybe I'm not good at these things, but that doesn't really matter because it's not really driving business. We've determined what the job is going to be. Now we're looking for people.
Well, before we look for people, we also have to sort of define what is the skill set that we need. So is it somebody that has to have a bachelor's degree, an associate's degree, years of experience? And I think people tend to automatically put down that people have to have a bachelor's degree. Why? So
I'm glad that's not a thing, because I wouldn't be there. I wouldn't be anywhere.
And I think that people need to evaluate that and look at, and there are absolutely cases where you should have that as a requirement for different positions. But if you're a small business owner and you're looking at somebody who can potentially grow with the organization and take on different roles, then you want to hire for resiliency, for people who have grit, that are willing to come in and learn.
How are you, like, I guess some of that you can find through the interview, but like, how do you find those things? Like, how do you find that in a candidate? Like, what are some of the things that you can, I don't know, like, how, that seems very difficult to see over a resume, or even in like, hey, here's some of the requirements for the position. Like, how in the world do you determine if somebody's going to have grit or be able to, like, I don't know, be reliable or any of those things through a questionnaire or a resume? Or like, that seems not super simple.
No, it's not. So there's so many different models out there that can assist with interviewing, and I think you have to go with something that's authentic to you. So one of the oldest ones is behavioral-based interviewing, where you ask situational-based questions that get it past experience.
Well, so is there anywhere, sorry to interrupt, but like, okay. I feel like before the interview, is there any way to kind of find that out prior to an interview? Like, is there anything you can include in, like, the answer may actually just be no, which my gut says it's probably just no, but is there any way to encourage that or seek that out in the way that you're posting a job or the way that you're looking at the resumes that are coming in?
Absolutely. So the answer is yes. Okay. You can. So rather than just posting a job description that says, let's say, customer service representative, and then walks through the primary responsibilities, the job duties, and then the necessary experience, what you can start with is a cultural overview. So you can say, I'm a small business, or we are a small business within our community. Our customers are our number one priority. What we look for are individuals who are going to give the personal care and attention to our employees, have an attention to detail. So you can walk through and give an idea of the culture that you're trying to create within your organization. And that's what I think candidates are looking at now, is that everyone can look at the laundry list of responsibilities, but you want to be attracted and you want to reach the heart of the person to have that connection to what the culture is of the organization.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay. That all makes sense. Now, so you were, before I interrupted you with the interviewing, I don't remember what the...
Behavioral-based interviewing.
That's it. Okay, so in that you said you're kind of building these scenarios to see what the reactions are, how they would handle those things. Was there anything else with that?
Yes. So you can ask these questions. You can also ask people to share the most significant experiences that they've had in their career. You can ask about what's the thing that you're most proud of, why, what did it impact? And, you know, I think people hesitate to ask about some of the challenges that we've had, but every single one of us has gone through failure.
Yeah.
And rather than making it a taboo and thinking that it's something that you shouldn't talk about in an interview, you should position it in a way where you're trying to understand how they grew from the experience and position it that way.
Okay.
And that's how you start to look at grit and resilience.
Okay. And when you're developing that line of that string of questions, is it helpful to use scenarios that are specific to your, like, in a hypothetical, or actually, maybe let's start there. Is it best to come up with hypotheticals or ask about history?
Probably both.
Okay.
So there are some organizations...
It feels really easy to bullshit hypotheticals.
It really does.
Like, everybody knows what you want the answer to be.
Right. So what HR calls that the woulda, coulda, shouldas.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about more of influencing the moment rather than being authentic to yourself. So you can use two different things. So you can look at past experience of the individual, or you can share scenarios that are typical within the business and ask them, you know, here's the situation. I know people that do simulations, role playing in the interview to sort of put people... I'm going to preface by, you should set the stage and the expectation with candidates if you're going to do that. You don't want to catch them off guard.
Yeah, that feels like...
But let them know in the interview process, hey, part of our process is we're going to role play some of these situations, or I'm going to present to you some of the common themes of what we see within the business, and we want to see how you'll react to it.
Okay.
But again, be upfront.
Yeah. That would be fantastic to know beforehand.
Right. Don't hijack a candidate.
Yeah.
It's not a positive experience.
No, that I can imagine that wouldn't be the best thing. Okay. So when you're Okay, so we've got these questions, like, when I'm coming up with these questions, should I be looking at, and maybe it's not, is it best to tailor the questions to the candidate or have a generalized set of questions? So I'll just leave it at that. Like, is it should I, hey, I know I'm interviewing you, I've looked at your resume, let me dive into your history and question based on that, or should I just hear the questions and we kind of, everyone's getting the same thing?
Well, I'm going to give you the HR response that gives HR a bad name, and that is you should create a consistent process for all candidates, because if you don't, it can come across as that you're being discriminatory or favoritism in the way that you do it.
Okay.
But here's what you can do through behavioral-based interviewing is you can have a list of 3 very similar questions, and based on the candidate, you can ask one of those questions.
Okay.
And what's most relevant to their experience and their background, but you're consistent in the questions that you're asking.
Okay, that makes sense. It also, from a like judging, like comparing candidates, it's difficult to compare if the question, if there's like just slightly different, tailored to their experience, that's one thing. But if they're like completely different, then it's like, well, what do we like? How do we compare two things that, like, I'm comparing this interview that was, I don't know, we talked about, I don't know, whatever, but like the experiences were way different. So that it just doesn't seem like a good idea just in the comparison sake, if you've got multiple candidates.
Well, you have to have a rubric to evaluate the candidates objectively. So, what's typically used is what's the situation, what were they responsible for, what were the actions that they took, and then what was the result that they got. And then what you do is you take the answers to those questions and you look at the alignment to the role and what do you feel is going to be the best. So it is a mix of like objective and subjective.
Yeah.
Because you have to pay attention to cultural fit. So somebody could have the great skill, but culturally, they're not great for the organization.
If it's just you and you're trying to create the culture, maybe that doesn't matter. You know what you want, I would imagine. Maybe you don't.
You learn very quickly when you hire someone whether what your intention is and what your impact is match.
Is that something, should I be considering that before I place or am looking for my first hire as well?
Yes.
Okay.
What is the culture of my organization? Because each of us as small business owners have such a vested interest and we have such a connection to the emotional side of being a business owner that if we have to be able to convey that to people who are coming into the organization.
Yeah.
And do it in a realistic way.
Yeah. And you can't expect, they're not going to have the same buy-in. Like
right. And we don't want to have them be like little mini-me's or approach it in the exact way. We want people to be authentic. But here are some of the non-negotiables that we have with our clients. So So, for example, with clients that I work with, there's a certain way to engage them, the questions that we ask, the way that we try to solve the problems, the way that we present information, the way that we facilitate, the way that we engage with them. There are certain behavioral standards that it's a non-negotiable for me.
Yeah.
Either you provide this level of service. Now, you can do it according to your personality, but these are the steps that have to be followed that are a part of our brand.
And is that something that you would include, or maybe at least pieces of that within the job description so that people are aware of that so you're not wasting a bunch of time on people that are not going to fit?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you are a small business owner, you probably want to have a mission and vision statement about what your business solves and how it serves client community. And then oftentimes I also encourage organizations to create the values, and the values should reflect the culture of the organization.
Okay. And that here's what at least is tough from, I don't know, if you're looking for those or at positions, I feel like all of those are just, I don't know. They just seem like not actually true. Like I feel like anytime I read of values or like, here's our mission, they're just like so lofty, and maybe at some point that was the mission and that was your values, but it doesn't appear that that is still the case. But I guess maybe that's just, not just, but probably larger organizations. So like maybe be realistic in those for your job descriptions. Like,
yeah, don't create like a buzzword salad.
Yeah. And I feel like that's what most of them are. Like,
yeah. So I'll give you an example. So in the times that you and I have worked together, that we've developed our partnership, I would see that within your personal brand, integrity would be one of your values. And integrity to you means that you're going to follow through with what you say that you're going to do. If you make a mistake, you're going to own it and you're going to rectify it as quickly as possible, and you're going to own it.
Yeah.
And so integrity as a value, if you see it on a piece of paper and you meet the person and it doesn't, they don't act in those particular ways. You're right. It's something that looks great on a website. But I think especially for small business owners, our brand and our reputation is everything, right?
Yeah.
And that's how you build your business. So values are a chance for you to reflect on, well, how am I engaging people in the business? And what are the values that are most important to me that then define how other people will behave within the organization?
Okay. Okay, so that makes sense. And that is, like you mentioned, that's good to include so that you can at least people are aware of that while they're applying. They know that those things. And then when you're in the interview or whatever step of the process that all of these non-negotiables are introduced.
Yes.
Then it's like, well, again, they're non-negotiables. So you're either agreeing to this or you're not. But if you're not, then on to the next, I suppose. Okay. So we've gotten our interview questions. We know how we're going to do this. Now we're ready to find candidates, which seems like a lot. It seems like a lot. There's so many places that you can go for that. I feel like a lot of small business, at least from the people that I work with, a lot of it seems just like actually getting clients is referrals.
Yeah.
What are the problem, or maybe there aren't. I'm imagining there are though. What are some of the problems with, or things to be aware of when you're looking at referrals and how to kind of navigate some of those types of challenges? Because I imagine that's like, hey, my good friend, he recommended this person, and now I'm not obligated to hire this person, but also I feel pressured to. Like, how do you work through those, or yeah, I'll stop mumbling.
Very carefully.
Yeah.
So I think it's a balance between setting the expectations with those that do make the referrals and always thanking them.
Yeah.
But be really clear about your process and say, this is fantastic. I think small businesses do a great job of hiring people from their network.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes that doesn't work out, or the person that's presented may be great in theory, but then when you interview them, your gut doesn't sit right, or they don't answer the questions in the way that you want them to answer, and you just recognize that maybe they're not the best fit. I think honesty is the best policy. So this is where I would go back and I would immediately inform the candidate, let them know first before you let the referral. And then always follow up with the person who referred the candidate. And it's not that you have to fully disclose, but just say, I just want to thank you so much for referring. I met them at this time. There's other candidates that I want to consider. Find the best way to say, and you don't want to throw the person under the bus.
Yeah.
By saying, oh, well, they had this huge deficit in this area. We don't want to disclose from the interview, but just say,
okay,
we're not going to move forward with them at this time.
Yeah, that seems, I don't know, just as somebody who it feels I feel like
cringy.
Yeah, well, there's that, but it also feels like there's so much just perceived pressure to hey, you hooked me up, you got me what you're thinking is a really good candidate, but also you're running a business, so you can't just hire everybody that's recommended to you, because then you end up with either poor work or you create this culture that is, I don't know, not ideal. Yeah, that's a tough one. Okay, so that is one avenue for finding employees or finding candidates. But what other, there's all of the marketplaces, we'll call them, I guess. I don't know I'm sure there's an actual term for those places, but the ZipRecruiter is, and all of those types of things. Can those work for small businesses? And is it something that you should just cast a wide net and just see what you find, or is there a way to be kind of strategic? Because all of those those all cost, right?
Yes.
So is there a way to approach the search for candidates to kind of maximize the money that you're spending, but also cast a wide enough net that you can get some good candidates?
Yes. So if you've never hired before and you don't have the resources to be able to hire someone to help you with the process, I think Indeed does a really good job for its recruiting for beginners.
Okay.
Where it actually walks you through the steps to be able to build a job description and then also set the radius of where you would want your candidates to come from. And that is something that I think you have to think about before posting the job, is this an in-person position? Is it a hybrid position? Or can this position be done virtually? And then that sets your radius for how far you'll look for a candidate. And then it also walks you through the process. You can phone screen. You can create custom emails in there to say, thank you for applying. We'll be in touch shortly. It can what's called disposition a candidate. So if you pull up the person's resume and they're an absolute mess, they don't have any of the experience, it can send a very nice note to say, we're not going to move forward with your application. But you want to be consistent with all of the candidates. So when people take the time to apply, I think it's a best practice to be able to follow up with them, because it does still leave an impression on your brand. So whether or not they're hired, they could be a customer.
Yeah, it's super frustrating whenever you apply somewhere and never hear back. It's like, hey, just tell me no. Just tell me no. How about that? Like, is that difficult? Honestly, just an email that said, hey, we're not interested. Like, that to me...
It takes less than 30 seconds to do that with a candidate.
Yeah, like that, even that short and like that kind of, I don't know, that wouldn't be the nicest email I ever got. But like...
No.
Yeah, but even that's like, all right, at least all right, yeah. I know now that they are not interested in whatever I've got to offer. And that's fine, but at least now I know. Okay, so that's a good resource. Indeed is a good one to use. Are there, again, is it a good idea to try as many of those as possible, or like depending on your funds? Like, I imagine well, I mean, it depends on the amount of money that you've got to spend on this, but yeah, like, should you be trying to cast a super wide net, or just, put all your eggs in one and say, like, I'm going to focus on this? Or does it really matter? Is it kind of case by case?
I think it has to be a two-prong approach. So the first thing is as a small business owner, you should always be leveraging your network and posting on either your business page on Instagram, Facebook, maybe you post it on LinkedIn, and leverage your network. But when it comes to a cost site, I think you should hone your efforts in on which one's best for you. So I'm sure ZipRecruiter and some of the other paid sites have the same features that I just talked about with Indeed. But you have to sort of go with which one really appeals to you and why. And I think you have to keep it, unless you get no candidates. So if you get zero response, and then you have to reevaluate, is my job description... does it need to be tweaked? Am I not focusing in on the right things? Do I need to look at a different marketplace? What do I need to evaluate?
Yeah, just make adjustments. Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. So are there any other, so you mentioned like social media, all of those. Are there any, I can't think of any other ways. Like, are there any other than like you've got the marketplaces, you've got social media and referrals? So that kind of covers.
Well, you could hire someone to take care of the entire process for you.
Yes, that is another option. Yeah.
So I have several clients right now that have said, Stephanie, I hate recruiting. I hate the entire process. It's time consuming. It's not what I enjoy, and I don't do it well.
Yeah.
What I want you to do is I want you to create the job description with my consent. I want you to post it. I want you to manage the candidates. And then what we did is we talked through, had conversations. Well, describe to me your culture so that I can relay that in the phone screen.
Yeah.
So that way, when I present the candidates to the client, it's only the best of the best, and I've already screened out people who are not both a skill set and a cultural fit. Now, there is a cost to that, but you also have to look at what's the best option.
Yeah.
If this is going to slow down your business and it's going to directly impact the momentum that you already have going, it might be a great idea to bring in somebody who can do that focus for you.
Well, and that kind of, there's been none of these things are coming to mind right now, but I know I've got several of them where it's like, there are some things that are just more frustrating for me that I have no interest in, that are like, I will pay somebody, I know it's going to cost me, but I don't want to deal with this. And I'll pay way more than, like, I'll pay a couple $100 for the, like, whatever this little service is, like something that I can probably do in a couple hours. And it's definitely better time, or better for me to do them myself, just financially. But it's like, these things are super frustrating to me. I like,
Take it.
I'm going to pay this person, you know, I don't want to cut clips for this. I know it's not worth it, but I'll pay somebody. Like, just cut the clips for me. I'm sick of cutting clips. So that, like, that's also a piece of that. Like, if you've tried and you've hired before and the process sucked, well, there are other options. Of course, like you said, those cost, but you don't have to do everything yourself.
No.
I mean, like with anything, but that is also something that I feel like is probably difficult as like small business owners. It's like, no, I have to do everything myself. I do everything myself.
Yeah, control, right?
Yeah.
This is my business. I have to take care of it.
Yeah. Well, and like you said, like I mean, I'm sure you can maybe. Do you ever make hires for people? So, like, you handle the entire process?
Yes.
Okay. That is a lot. That's a lot. Okay. So, I guess, yeah, you can actually let go of the entire process and just like, hey, I need a new employee. And however long later, it's like, okay, well, my new employee's here. Okay. So, that is an option. Okay. How do we get there? We got there because I asked what the other ways to get candidates were. Okay. So we are, so we've got candidates now, and the interview, we've developed our interviewing questions or what we're looking for. How can you, like, maybe this isn't relevant and maybe this is just like, if you're not a good interviewer, then it's going to be tough to get a job. But is there a way to tell if, like, I don't know. I imagine if you're dealing with, if you're hiring for a position that isn't super like customer facing, you might be interviewing people that tend to be more introverted or just not as open. Are there any techniques to finding somebody who may not be interviewing well, or tailor the interview to kind of help break people out of that? Because you may be missing on some, like, if I'm not customer facing, if I'm just helping whatever this company is on the back end, it's like, well, they don't necessarily have to be super outgoing or great at an interview to be really good at this job. Is there a way to handle those types of situations in the interview and how to like tailor those correctly?
I think that the behavioral based interview questions really cover that.
Okay.
So if you do have somebody who is more of a data analyst, or they're somebody that does IT infrastructure, those people are going to be analytical. They're going to be very objective, probably not extroverted. So asking more about their skills and experience, but then also you do have to gauge their communication skills.
Yeah.
And so where they may not be conversational, they may not be like, let's go to happy hour on Friday or go bowling, we want to make sure that they're still going to be a good fit in terms of communication. So what we can do is we can customize the questions to look at how are they going to fit in. Still, again, back to the culture of the organization, they have to engage to some level, but what does that look like? They don't have to be the life of the party, but are they going to communicate well? Are they going to communicate consistently to be able to achieve the goal?
How can you, like, what kind of questions help you come up with that? Like, that seems difficult to determine somebody's communication style in any form. Like, yeah, that seems difficult to accomplish by asking a couple questions, right? Like,
Well, so it depends on the question that you ask. So if I were going to interview somebody, let's say for a back-end IT position, I would ask a question such as, tell me about a time that you identified a problem. How did you notify the other individuals on your team, the customer, the rest of the organization? How did you engage others to solve the problem?
okay.
And then you
That
ask
makes a lot of sense.
what did you do? What did you say? What did you share? What was the
Okay.
outcome of that?
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
You can also ask a question about what is your preferred communication? What's the best way for you to communicate with those that you work with most closely? When I've worked with IT individuals, some of them will say, Stephanie, my primary way of communicating with my team is through Slack. Don't call me. I won't pick up the phone. Or a text message or some other way. So we can ask those questions and then align it. Does that communication preference fit what we need within the organization? If the answer is no, they might have a great skill set, but they're not a good cultural fit.
Yeah. Okay. So with okay, that makes a lot of sense. Okay. So other interview, when I'm imagining, I have never had to interview anybody. I've also never hired anybody. So my first time interviewing somebody, how much, like, I know I've been in interviews where it didn't feel like there was any preparation done.
Yeah.
How should I be preparing for, whether it's my first interview or my first round of hiring or just any interview? Like, I imagine there's got to be some prep, or there should be, if you're actually, I mean, you're bringing somebody onto the team. Like, I would imagine there's more than 2 minutes of prep to do before this. Like, how should I be preparing for those, for those interactions?
So I think that there has to be sort of a two-prong approach to this. So there's your preparation, and then there's the expectation that you set with the candidate.
Okay.
So your role as the interviewer is to review their resume, to highlight the key areas that you either want them to go into more detail or you have questions, review the interview questions that you want to ask, and make sure that you set up enough time to do it appropriately. Because just as we're interviewing the candidates are interviewing us.
Yeah.
So I'm sure when you've gone into an interview where it just seemed like they were winging it and they didn't prepare, you're already going in disengaged.
Yeah.
Like, this is a waste of my time. I came here, I took off from work, I did this.
Yeah.
And now this person is just pulling it together. That's not a great experience.
Yeah.
So my recommendation to anyone that is going to set up an interview is reach out to the candidate and set the expectation of what the interview process is going to look like. Give them the address, tell them where to park, give them your phone number, let them know how long it's going to be, explain what the process is going to be, and then what the timeline to hiring. And sometimes we don't know, right?
Yeah.
But we can say within the next 3 weeks, we're going to make a decision. In this candidate market, you want to get back to candidates as quickly as possible because they're moving on. It's a candidate market right now.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, like, again, you're bringing somebody onto the team. Like, you got to care. Like, just show, and any preparation, I mean, you can tell if somebody has not done anything. Like, when you're looking through and you're looking at this resume like it's the first time you've seen it, it's like, hey, come on, like, at least read through this beforehand. Come on, like, what are we doing? Why am I here? Like you said, like, what am I doing here? I took off of my other job, the one that's paying me right now, to come to you, to leave my current situation for you, and you can't even look through, like, you can't prepare at all.
Right.
And so what kind of culture does that, what kind of, yeah, I mean, think about the view that gives for the candidate that you're trying to bring onto your, that's not positive. That doesn't feel like a good environment for the type of candidates that I'm sure you want to bring onto the team.
The other piece that I failed to mention earlier is when you set up the interview expectation, you definitely want to make sure that you're talking about the salary range. I don't know how many times I've heard from candidates that have said, I really wish I would have known the hours, the commitment, or the salary before coming in for the interview.
Is that something that is good to include on the job description for?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I believe that you should have a salary range on the job description and and then talk about it in the phone screen, because people are applying for multiple jobs. They're not going to remember from job to job, so making sure that you are raising that in either the phone screen and again in the interview prep.
Are there instances where it is better to not include that in the description? Like, I can kind of, as I'm thinking, I didn't think about that before you just brought that up, but like there are times where I feel like that could be, I don't know about beneficial, but maybe like, I don't know. Like, are there times where it's good to not include it or preferred to not include that? Or, yeah, I'm like trying to think through that. And I feel like there should be instances where it's like, maybe not, like maybe then you're just getting people that are looking at, but also that is important. That's an important piece.
I think that salary is such a driver to people's engagement. And if I did not tell you and you came in for an interview and then I said to you, you're going to be making $10 less an hour.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if, yeah. Well, like there's this piece that's like maybe you get candidates that would actually be interested based on the job that's actually being done, where they feel some, like it taps into something, like it feels like they're actually contributing, or like they're getting some sense of purpose out of the job where they're willing to take less, but they wouldn't have known that if they didn't talk to you. That feels like such a small use case though, or like such a small example that it's like, you just tell people what they're
and
roughly.
you still want people to have the expectation going in that if they are going to be making less, like that's a life adjustment.
Yeah.
You have to look at your finances. You have to look at what you are going to have coming in and make that decision. I've absolutely, I know you and I have made moves that we knew that financially it would be a step back for us, but it would allow us to then grow exponentially later for us to move up. But that was a conscious choice that we've made.
Yeah. Yeah. And we did. Yeah. Okay. I think I'm convinced. I think,
Oh, good.
I'm sure I'll think of some way, but I feel like it's probably just best to just include it. And like you said, it's a range, like unless there is only one option, it's like you're going to make this much, but it is nice as the candidate to know, hey, am I going to be, like you said, am I going to be making a massive adjustment? Like, do I need to be changing my everything about my life to take this job? Maybe I am interested. Like maybe it does feel like this is what I want to do, but I need to know, I've got to make all these adjustments. And I'm okay with that, but I know that going in, and I'm not going to make all these arrangements to come to this interview and do all these things. And then you hit me 3 weeks later and say, hey, we'd like to offer you the job, and this is what it's going to be. And I say, oh shit, I just wasted a month and a half on this process. And now I know I'm going to be making half of what I am already making. It's like, okay, well,
yeah,
that would have been good to know way beforehand, because it could have saved all of us the time. Okay. And actually from your perspective as the hiring agent or employer, it's probably going to save you a lot of time in those cases where it's like somebody wasn't going to be interested based on the salary. Like it doesn't matter what the circumstances, what the job you're offering, they weren't going to take that for based on the money that you're offering. And now you've wasted your time that you needed to spend that time actually hiring somebody, and you wasted all of it because you didn't tell them beforehand. Okay, I'm convinced. Tell the people, tell your candidates.
Transparency.
Yes, yeah. Okay. So we're just about at an hour right now. So this is good. Okay, so you are interviewing. We've gone through some of like how to prepare, how to prepare for like developing your questions. For during the interview, how are you as the hiring person? Is there anything other than the answers? Like what should I be paying attention to? Because it feels like I would want to take notes during this, but I also feel like I want to be paying attention. Yeah, are there particular things that I should be paying attention for, or particular things to, and this may be person to person, like I like to take notes, I like to write, so I'm sure I would be more likely to do some of that stuff, but yeah, are there any like anything I should be doing during as I'm interviewing somebody?
So as the interviewer, obviously everybody has different preferences, so we want to make sure that we're focusing in on what's best. But if you're interviewing multiple candidates, I think taking notes is critical.
Yeah.
And you want to be consistent in what you write. So this is where I'm going to put my HR legal hat on for a second.
Okay.
And whatever you do, you have to be consistent for every candidate that you meet. And you want to make sure
even in like your note taking?
Yes.
Okay. That's good to know.
So in your so if you're using an interview guide and you're asking candidates to answer these questions, you're taking notes on their responses and then your thoughts on those responses. So you want to make sure that you're just focusing in on the facts. You should never write personal opinions of how you feel about the person, messy, whatever it might be. You don't want to have anything that could be incriminating on the notes that you take.
Okay.
And it should focus on the answers to the questions. But some of the things that you should pay attention to are, how are they presenting themselves? Are they making it more conversational? Are they engaging? Are they sharing relevant examples? There have been times that I've been in behavioral-based interviews where people never get to what actions they took and what results they had. They can talk about the situation, they can talk about the people that are involved, but they never get to what they owned and what they did.
Yeah.
So those are things that I'll write on the resume, or I'll write on the, not the resume, the interview guide, is I'll write down answered parts of question, did not answer the question fully.
Okay. So man, that's a lot. Yeah, like that feels like a lot to keep track of during. So the suggestion is the way that they responded, and there were two parts of it: the way that they responded and their answers.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And I ask permission to take notes.
Okay.
So as you mentioned, it's difficult. There's so much to pay attention to. They're just as nervous. They're trying to put their best foot forward.
Well, especially if this is my first time, or
Yes.
or like my first string of interviews. It's like, okay, well, I'm gonna miss some things, and I might hire wrong here, but that's fine.
And I think it's okay to let people know and be very transparent about the fact that I want to let you know that you're going to be my first employee, or potentially be my first employee. This is the first time that I'm going through this process myself. And I think that puts candidates at ease.
Yeah.
And it's, oh, well, they're trying to figure this out too.
Yeah.
And then the way that I present it to candidates, especially when I'm taking notes, is you're going to be sharing so much with me through this process. I want to ask permission that I can take some notes, so that as I'm going through and I'm evaluating people's responses, that I can go back and look at this. So as you're talking, I may not be making direct eye contact with you. I might be jotting down a few notes. And most people are, will say, that's fine.
Let's say you do that and they're not cool with that. How can you handle that? Like, I'm not really, I don't know, which I don't know why you would not be, but maybe you have a reason for it.
I've never experienced it, but if it did happen to me, what I would say is, okay, I want to respect that. So in between each of the questions that I ask, I'm going to pause to take notes so that that could be awkward.
Yeah, it will likely be
awkward.
Yeah, that'll likely be awkward.
Yeah.
Okay. So you mentioned, maybe we don't want to get into this, but I kind of do. You mentioned like some of those observations that are maybe not the best to actually write down, but all of those things kind of go into, like, if you show up a certain way to an interview, can you be taking, like, you want to remember those things because those are important. I think
they are. So let me clarify. So if you specifically tell someone to show up in business professional, and they show up in shorts and flip-flops, or if they show up where it looks like they just rolled out of bed, you can put on there did not meet dress code requirements, or you could say, different parts of this. We already have such implicit and explicit bias in the way that we look at candidates, and we don't want to. We want to control that and make sure that we're assessing candidate on skill versus our own bias or assumptions. But we also don't want to open ourselves up for discrimination where. I had someone way back in the day that wrote down, looks like she's pregnant.
That's a problem.
That's definitely a problem.
That feels like a problem.
And if it were to ever come up that that person felt discriminated against, you have to keep your employee files and the interview guide. And if somebody saw that could be used in court. Yeah,
well, and I think you actually said this already, but writing down facts, not opinions.
Yes.
Where it's, like you said, arrived in flip-flops and a t-shirt. That's a fact.
That's a fact.
No argument here.
Yeah.
Whatever the judgment is or however that relates, but the fact is arrived in flip-flops and a t-shirt.
Yes.
Okay.
I've had another one where...
Looks like she's pregnant. I don't know if I would consider that a fact.
That is absolutely not a fact, and should not be documented anywhere or ever even used in the hiring process.
Yeah.
I've had people who, what is appropriate is if you know that the candidate is coming in and they haven't prepared. So if you pose the question, I've asked you to look at our website and I've asked you to review a little bit about our business, and if somebody sits there and says, "Oh yeah, no, I didn't do that," you can say, did not come prepared to interview.
Okay.
And I've had that where you can send them all of the information ahead of time. You set the expectation. I'd like to hear your points of view and your perspective on what our business is and how we approach clients. And they come and they're like, "Oh yeah, I forgot."
Yeah. Okay.
You're like, "Okay, this is over. Bye-bye."
Yeah.
Just kidding.
Well, do you have a if it is, because I've heard other people talk about like cutting it short. Like if it does not look like it's, if you can tell early, should you fulfill the length of the interview, or maybe it's shorter than normal? But
it's shorter than normal. If the person did come into the interview, you don't want to do a mic drop and leave the room. You want to be respectful of their time, but I would definitely cut it shorter. So when you have great candidates, you're going to ask more questions. You're going to engage those candidates more. We want everyone to have the same experience.
Okay. So
are you going to spend an hour with them? Probably not. Maybe it's half hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah. But still kind of go through the same general
Yes.
same general process. Okay. But like you said, like if it's a bad conversation or I mean, if the questions are super vague and I mean, like if it's a bad interview or a bad conversation, both of you are going to be aware of that, I would hope.
I'm sure that there's other HR professionals out there that would disagree with me, but if you're looking at protecting yourself against discrimination or people coming back and saying that they weren't given a fair process, to me, it's just a best practice.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So is there anything else during the interview that we haven't talked about that you should be either paying attention to or be aware of? Anything that we have? I feel like we covered a lot there with the interview.
So there is just a few things that that I've been thinking about is that we always want to engage candidates as they come in, like we do small talk, but we want to make sure that we're asking questions that aren't getting at sort of protected classes.
Okay.
So, tell me where you live, or, are you married? Do you have a family? All of those questions that we want to avoid. We can ask the question, tell me about yourself, and leave it broad, but you definitely want to be very...
That makes so much sense.
Yeah, be very careful about that.
That's why that's the question.
Yes.
Okay.
And then people share to their level of comfort.
That makes so much sense. Because I hate that question because it's like, I don't know. How the hell am I, like, tell me about yourself? I don't know. I've been around for almost 30 years. Like, there's a lot. There's a lot that I do. What do you want to know? But you can't really ask those questions. So...
I mean, you can tailor it, Brad, where you can say...
That makes so much... That was just like... Okay, that makes so much sense. I always hated that. Like,
right.
Hey, what are you getting? Like, just ask the question. What do you want to know? Okay.
But I've tailored it to, tell me about your career background, or, tell me what has led you to this point. So I'll ask questions like that rather than throwing the blanket question out where, and people roll their eyes and they're
it's like,
what do I share?
Yeah. How, like, do you care about my personal, like, what are you asking for?
Yeah.
Okay, that makes so much sense. Okay.
And I think that people innocently go into it because they want to learn about the person. And let's face it, in small business, small towns, people want to make those connections. In Pittsburgh, it's not, the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation. I think it's 3 here in Washington County.
Yeah.
And so people just genuinely want to know, but they don't recognize that it could potentially be a discriminatory question that we're asking.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. That's good. Okay. Okay, so we are interviewing. We've interviewed. We've got good candidates. Also, you didn't have any time you needed to be out of here, right?
Nope.
Okay, we are just over an hour, so I'm good to keep going if you are.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got candidates. We've got a few that we're deciding between before we are interviewing. Should I know, like, it's so hard to be completely objective with anything. I mean, with anything, but is there I think you mentioned some type of rubric or something like that. Is there a way that I should be scoring this so that I can, but feel kind of has to be part of that also, I would imagine.
Yes. So part of it is cultural. So are they personable? Do we feel that they're going to fit into the culture? What behaviors did they demonstrate through the interview? Are they articulate? Mm-hmm. Are they high energy? Are they passionate about something? Are they detail-oriented? Are they super motivated to achieve certain results? But then what we also go back to is looking at the interview questions. And as I mentioned, there's the situation, the task, the action, and the result. And how well did they answer those questions? And if you have people who answer partially, you take points off. And then if you have people who are really, really strong next to each other, and that's an ideal situation for you to have multiple candidates that you're like, these people are awesome.
Yeah.
Then you really have to go in and look at the cultural fit.
Okay.
Who is going to be the best fit for us right now? We still are going to engage both candidates and, thank them for their time and maybe, talk to them about opportunities down the line. But that's what you really want to look at.
And so let's say you've got these two, I know there have been times where I've had like second interviews or like that's relatively common. Is that something you should decide on beforehand, or is that something that you can say like, okay, well, I've got 4 candidates that I really think are going to be great. Let's do a second round of interviews. And if so, well, should you have that decided beforehand? Should you have that process in place beforehand so that okay, we're in this situation. I know exactly how to handle this. And how do you tailor a second interview differently than the first one? Does that make sense?
It does. I am a firm believer in being very upfront about what the full process is with the candidate out of the gate. But sometimes when you do have multiple candidates that now rise up, you can say, we've had really great candidates come in, and now what we'd like to do is do a shorter second round of interviews, and we're going to focus in on maybe some other critical skills. I've had clients that have then actually physically brought them into the business, taken them on a tour, have them meet individuals, or maybe it's like a case study where they can solve a problem.
I don't know where Jeff talked about it, but Jeff, I think he might have done like a podcast or something about it. I'll try to find that if there was a podcast. But I think he mentioned one time actually bringing somebody in. Maybe this isn't a recommendation, but actually like 1099ing somebody for a day and bringing them in and like treating them kind of as an employee, bringing them along with you and like paying them for the day, but having them go through and seeing how they actually mesh with everybody. I don't know if that's a good approach or not, but it feels like that could be, and now you're taking a day or a half day or whatever that is, but it seems like that could be a way to work through but maybe not. Maybe that isn't a great way to compare because then you're not comparing similar experiences. I don't know where you're.
So my thought would be to bring them in, have other people be a part of the interview process, and then do a case study.
Okay.
And so maybe it's a common challenge that the organization has, and they can submit their response or talk through it.
Okay.
I think 1099ing them opens the HR legal door again, where that could potentially be problematic.
Okay. Yeah, and that might not have been like a determining thing. That might have been, okay, we've decided to hire, but let's do this first. I think
that's a great way to bring in consultants or individuals who might be contractors, that you do bring them in and you sort of test them out. That's a fantastic best practice.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, so for the second round of interviews, try to be a little bit more specific and tailor it more to the job, with yeah, I guess that's it. Like tailor it more to the job, and then determine what's best at that point. Okay, that makes sense. So we're making decisions. We are letting everybody know, hey, you didn't get the job, and you did get the job. That feels like a minor step, but is there anything to be aware of when you're offering the job or letting a candidate know, okay, you're the one?
Again, it comes back to consistency.
Okay.
If it's referrals, you want to call the person and you want to thank them for coming in and you want to let them know. But you want to make sure that you're contacting every candidate, because we already talked about that.
Yep.
Is being ghosted does not feel good.
Yeah.
And it just it goes against your brand, right?
Yeah.
That whether we hire them or not, they're a person in our community that we still want to engage. The offer, I think, is I'm clearly an extrovert. So for me, it's I want to call the person and I want to make the offer. I want to engage them, see if they have any questions, concerns, and then start to walk through the process. So are you available in 2 weeks? What are the questions that you have? And then set the stage for what happens between the offer and the start date.
How quickly, like, should you have, maybe this is dependent on how much of a rush you're in, but like, is there a certain amount of time that you should allow for a decision? Because, I mean, depending on the job, the change may be pretty large or it may not be.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like there should be some, you should get a little wiggle room. Like, hey, make the decision in X amount of time. Is there something that works best, or at least this amount of time? Or, and again, it might be, I'm sure all of these are like very situational, but there's got to be some type of at least guidelines or suggestions maybe.
I would say 2 to 3 days.
Okay. That feels pretty reasonable on both ends.
Yeah. 2 to 3 days. Or there's times that I've made offers to candidates where they've said, this is a significant change. I'd like a week to think about it. But they're letting me know. Yeah. I check with the client. If the client's okay with it, we give them a week.
Yeah. Well, and that flexibility is, unless you don't have that time. But I mean, will it suck if they get to the end and say, I'm not really interested? Sure, but if you're not in the massive rush, like, be a little flexible. Like,
yeah.
I've
also had people who have asked for that time frame and then declined.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sucks.
Yeah.
It's kind of a bummer.
Yeah. So out of that candidate pool, do you have somebody who's potential backup? And have that conversation. So if I have candidates where there's two that there's obviously a number one and then there's a number two, I'll always go back to the client and say, do you want to extend an offer or do we open this back up again? And making sure that we give them that option before.
And you definitely shouldn't be doing that before the other has declined.
Right.
Okay.
So if we have several candidates that were really strong, but we definitely had a ranking of 1 through 3, I would make the offer to one and see what they say. And then if they decline or they come back, then what I would do is I would go back to the client and say, do you want me to make an offer to number 2?
And that, even if they're not, even if it's not so like cut and dry, like let's say you have 1A and 1B, like super close, still the same practice, like
yes,
okay, yeah, that
you
feels,
never make multiple offers
for
to
one
candidates.
job. Yeah, that feels
so
dirty,
awful and wrong.
Yeah.
So you make one offer, and you want to make sure that you get it in writing, and either accept or decline, and then you can move forward.
Okay. Okay. And now we are bringing them on. I'm sure we could have...
This could be another hour.
It could. We'll keep it kind of high level for now, because I'm sure there's going to be... This is like I said, this could be... This whole process could be several.
Onboarding could be a completely separate one.
Yeah. So we'll keep it like pretty vague for this one. How, I mean, I should have everything, I would imagine, in a, maybe not a perfect world, in like most worlds. I should have an idea of what this onboarding is going to look like before I'm even hiring somebody. Is that?
Yes.
Okay.
So knowing what paperwork you need to have, are you paying them as a 1099 or are you putting them on payroll? Do you have a payroll service? What's the steps in setting that up?
That is, yeah, we didn't cover any of that. Damn. Sorry, guys. Sorry, I tried to be thorough, but I missed some things. We'll get that on the next one. Okay, so let's leave some of that. We'll talk about actually like bringing them on, and then we'll get into well, actually, you know what? This was on purpose. That's 201. That or whatever. We'll call that 201. This is 101. We're covering the basics here. Okay. Okay, so we've got they're going to start. How should we be treating these first couple weeks, because they are super important to the rest of the time that we've got with this employee. Yeah, like generally, how should we be introducing them to either the job, the team? Maybe it's not a team. Maybe, I guess maybe now it is, because there's at least two of us. But how should we be kind of treating some of those situations?
You want to prepare for creating a great positive experience. So being prepared on day one, making sure that you're setting aside enough time to properly onboard them, welcome them, orient them if they have their own office or their own space, setting up just the regular expectations, where to park, here's the kitchen, here are all of the amenities that we have. I think people take for granted that when you work in that space, we want to welcome people in and really make sure that they understand all of the logistics.
Yeah.
If they get a key to the building, if they need an entry card, an ID, any of that type of needs to be thought about and prepared for day one.
Is there a there's a lot there. There's a lot to go through there, and I feel like it is difficult. Kind of like we've said a couple times, like when you're the one that does this every day, you're in the office every day, it's difficult to see all that. I almost imagine like bringing in a friend and like, hey,
what do people need to know about this?
Yeah, like here's what we need to do. Tell me what your questions are. Obviously that might not be the best way, but it's a way. I mean, I'm not an expert in this, but yeah, just figuring out like even the smallest details are like
important.
Like you said, like where's the kitchen? Where's that? Like, do we have a refrigerator here? And some of those things might be helpful to know day one, like before they start.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned parking, some of those types of things. Like, hey, should you be prepared to bring your own lunch? Do we have a place to store your lunch? No? Okay, well, you should know that. Like, I don't want you bringing whatever it is, and now I've got just room temperature fish sitting on the counter because we don't have a refrigerator for you or a microwave. Like, that's not ideal.
Well, and how are you welcoming in? I can't speak today, but how do you bring them in and create that that first day experience that says I made the right decision?
Yeah,
and it's different for everybody. There are some companies that I've worked for directly where I showed up and I had a welcome basket. And the welcome basket had like all of the geeky stuff that you need. I had Post-it notes. I had my own stapler. I was like, oh, I have my own stapler.
Yeah.
I had a cup of coffee or a coffee card. My desk was clean and ready for me to go. Because if you hand somebody over to a dirty desk, it sounds like something that's so small, but it says, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I have other clients who say, Steph, I let them go to Staples or Target, and they have a gift card where they get to pick out what they want for their desk space. They make it not mandatory, but they bring the team together, or they have a welcome lunch. They also set the expectation that sometimes your first day, it's about filling out the paperwork.
Yeah.
It goes through all of the logistics. It gets you logged on your laptop if you have one, your phone set up, whatever it might be. But it might be a shorter day because it's just logistics.
Yeah. Okay. And so as you're going through, like, I imagine there are some approaches that are just like you throw them to the wolves and I don't know, you figure it out, or you kind of ease people into it. I'm sure this is very job specific. I've said it how many times, but like I'm sure it is actually, maybe that's not a great question, but is there a method that works best? Should you be easing people in or not? Or is it actually just super case by case? Like maybe there may not be a way to ease people in.
if you are going from just being one person to two people, it is baptism by fire. And you can, but set that expectation, saying, you and I are going to figure this out together. For the first few weeks, you and I are going to be attached at the hip. You're going to go on client visits. You're going to walk through calls. You're going to do these different things, and letting them know. And that's where I hand over a notebook and I say, take notes. And also open it up and say, I've been doing this. Maybe you see a different way of doing it, and let's talk about it. Because sometimes, like I said before, we get too close to it, and we don't recognize when we've developed ineffective or inefficient ways of doing things.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, especially if you're just going from just me to now I've got somebody. Like, I imagine any amount of preparation is still going to be not enough. Like, you're going to have to be just figuring it out because you're going from doing everything to not everything.
And figuring out how to pull it apart to what makes sense, to what do I still own and manage, and then what do I truly hand off.
And being very clear about setting what those expectations are so that there isn't, like, there's going to be, you can minimize the gray areas because I feel like that's where you can start to, if those aren't set up properly, that's where you can start to notice like your clients can start to notice some things. You know, you haven't made it super clear that new hire is, they're actually just taking the lead on whatever. Like, they're the ones that are, they clean the counters. But they think like that hasn't been made super clear, and now the counters haven't been cleaned in a week. It's like, well, okay, well now the customers are noticing that we don't have clear counters because I didn't make it super clear. You thought I was doing it. I thought you were doing it. So just, I feel like the expectation setting is super important. Even if you're just taking longer to introduce or not giving them as much at the beginning, just making it very clear, like, here is what, for the next week, here's what my expectations are, or for the next month or whatever. Like, just be clear. Whatever the decision is, just be clear so both of you are on the same page, or maybe it's not just the two of you now, but so the team is on the same page.
Yeah, and you can even go back and review the job description on day one.
Yeah,
because
be
depending
helpful.
on how long the interview process is, it just brings it front and center, and it's saying, like, this is where we're starting, and these are the things, and looking at, do we already have a routine? Let me walk you through the daily routine.
Yeah.
And orienting them that way, because unfortunately, I do have clients that will say, Steph, we were super clear in the interview about what the job was, and then when they came in and we started to ask them, day one, review the job description, set the expectations, as you said, and let them know that it will evolve over time.
Yeah.
What they're going to do their first week, their first month might be different what they do from month 2 through 5, 6.
Yeah.
And then we continue to revisit that.
Yeah. Well, and like, I know for my work, like, my daily routine is it is so dependent on the week, on the type of jobs that I'm doing at the time. So, like, if I'm bringing somebody on, I imagine, like, what seems like it would be helpful for me would be, okay, anytime I'm doing, like, try to keep track of all the different things that you're doing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is the first time I'm doing this with new employee here. Even if you're not going to be involved with this, you're going to, like, drop what you're doing for the day. You're walking through this with me. And I'm sure you can't do that all the time, but as much as possible, that seems like bring them in, because depending on the role, there may be, like, the fresh perspective, it might be nice. It might be nice for whatever you're doing. Okay, maybe that doesn't make sense, but
it does. Recently, I had a master's student who is getting their degree in organizational development, and human resources asked me if she could shadow me for a day. And I had to stop and think, what do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, we're sort of programmed to in our routine, but then to slow down and making it a meaningful experience for somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, do I want her to come to my house and watch me work in my basement? No. Do I have to think about the clients that would be open to that. I have to think about, well, how would I prep her? How would I engage her to make it meaningful and not just seem like we'll just tag along for the day.
Yeah.
And so those are the things that when you are a small business owner, it is time intensive to slow down to be able to go fast later.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I've thought about, like, I've had people ask me that, like, well, what do you do? It's like, well, honestly, I don't know what I do all day, but I start with things to do and then I end with more things to do. And I feel like I'm doing things during the day, but I don't know what those things are most days. Like, to have somebody shadow the whole time, like, well, you're going to watch me edit for 8 hours? I don't think you're going to get anything out of this. Like,
right.
But that's what's on the agenda today. So, okay. Yeah. Bringing somebody on from 1 to 2, that feels like potentially the most difficult. I'm sure they're all difficult, actually. I'm sure it's all difficult, but that feels like the most difficult part. Like, going from 0 employee other than me to somebody working with me, that feels like the biggest hurdle. And then after that, like, it probably just gets easier. Maybe not, because you're at that point you're dealing with everybody's personalities and trying to make sure all that meshes, and I'm sure episode 2 we'll dive into that. But like but yeah, from just me to one more, that feels like
it's a
super
big
difficult.
leap. It's a very big leap because it's fundamentally changing the way that you run your business.
Yeah.
And now you have another human that you're responsible for, that you have to manage and lead.
Yeah.
And has to live the brand and do the work the way that you hope they will.
Yeah.
And so it's a lot. But being able to admit what you know and what's working and being open to hearing really hard feedback is critical for you to grow as a business owner and a leader of people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot. Yeah,
that's the third
God,
podcast.
I know. God, this is going to be this is going to be its own series. I have a feeling, because as you're talking, it's like, oh, there's so many questions I want to ask about this, but we're already at an hour and a half. Okay, let's save. Okay, I feel like we've covered the basics of hiring and bringing somebody on.
We have.
I feel like we've covered a good amount of intro to hiring. Maybe missed some of the things, but we'll come back to it. Yeah, I feel like we covered a lot there. Anything else with onboarding, since that's the last thing that we talked about? Is there anything else with that you should be aware of or preparing for that we didn't cover? Like, obviously there's a lot that you should be preparing for, that, like, more of the details, but anything high level that's really make sure that this is happening or this isn't happening in this first week or month or whatever.
A lot of it has to do with the legal side of it, which is the paperwork. Just make sure that you have all of the appropriate documents. Like, you have to do the I-9 document on the first day, setting them up for payroll, if that's the way that you're going to go. But just making sure every single bit of the new hire paperwork is done on day one. Otherwise, it opens you up for tremendous risk. Okay.
That's good to know. Anything else that comes to mind? I don't think so. I know there's a lot more, but I feel like that's a pretty good overview. Any closing thoughts? Anything that along the way we've not covered or you want to make sure we cover? Anything like that?
I just think as you opened it up, Brad, with the perceptions of HR, is HR should really be about the human side of this and the engagement and how we make people feel and set them up in an environment for success.
Yeah.
And sometimes it feels like HR is not that partner, but you have to be aware of the regulatory and compliance things that are critical to that success. So
yeah, it feels like there's a good like, I don't know, the experience that I've had in the CDC's roles, like the difference in HR experiences just from having somebody who, and maybe it's because of the fact that, like in this case, you're an outside person. So the from the employee side, you're not directly employed by the people, like the boss, you know. You are, but you're still an outside organization, and maybe that's a piece of it, maybe it's not, but I don't know. I feel like there's from the employee side, it just feels like a much better experience because, like I said, it feels like the organization does kind of actually care about you, but it also, the interaction is just way different. It's not we've had however many meetings at this point that are not like, we've had our own meetings, but through work, it's like, well, monthly at least. And we've got these team things, and it really, it allows everybody to kind of work together and make sure that everybody is communicate. Like, how does everybody communicate, and what are your preferred methods? And like, it sounds weird to mention that, but it's important. Like, maybe it's not super important, but when you do cover it, it makes a big difference. Like, you can definitely not talk about those things and everybody will just figure it out, or they won't, and whatever.
And they'll leave.
Yeah. But when you do have those conversations, it just feels like more of a team atmosphere, and it just feels better as the employee. Like, it feels like we're all actually trying to work together, not like you're just jamming a bunch of pieces together and we haven't thought about it.
It's cohesion.
Yeah.
So rather than you all trying to figure it out and having sort of this longer learning curve, if you have somebody who's in human resources that understands how to build culture, it shortens the learning curve, it minimizes the conflict, the frustration, and it gets to productive work much quicker.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, if you can't pay for those services, I think you can still probably do all of those things.
Yes.
You just have to be very aware, like, actually think about what you're doing. You know, you don't have to hire somebody to do it. If you can, hire an expert, because experts are experts, you know, like, that's what they do. But if you can't hire, that's fine too. Just pay attention. Like, hiring is important. Bringing people on is important. Obviously, you know that, but it can just be, I need a body to fill this role, when really that's probably not good long term. It might be great short term. Like, I
for
need
maybe
somebody.
a day.
Yeah. But if you actually put some thought into it, you can start to create the culture that you're looking for and really set your business up for continued growth and continued success, not just short-term plugging holes because you're overwhelmed and you need to do it quickly. And maybe you do have to make a quick hire and you're not prepared for it and it is plugging a hole, but know that you can't continue to do that. And if you do, you can only plug so many holes, and then the whole thing is just this is a terrible analogy, but you get what I'm saying. Like, you can only do
fingers to plug the holes.
Yeah, yes. You can only do that so many times. So if you got to plug a couple holes quickly at the beginning, that's okay. But just know that you need to go back in and develop those processes so that you can just make a better system to get a better stream of employees and make sure that everybody is actually working together well, because it is important. Like, you can make a lot of positive impact on your business if you decide to focus on those things. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be an expert to do anything. You can at least put some thought into it, though, and do better than putting no thought into it.
Yeah, use your network. Just ask questions, because everybody has either positive experiences about the hiring process and interviewing and onboarding, and they've had negative.
Yeah.
And even just asking your network about those questions can help you build a checklist. Like, these are the things I'm not going to do.
Yeah.
These are the things that I'm going to focus on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there will be another several of these, some HR focused. I also want to make sure that we talk about like your past and just your challenges as the business owner. But for now, where can all of the humans of the earth find you? Where are you located?
So
not in space, but in like on the digital world.
So I'm located out of Monongahela.
Okay.
So, but I do a lot of my work in Washington and Pittsburgh, and actually extend into other states virtually. And I have a new email address.
Great. Which
is steph@nonprofit.sidekick.com.
I'm surprised that URL is available.
I know.
That's kind of...
It's a fantastic...
Yeah,
I love it.
I like that.
I have to give credit to Wendy for that. I did not come up with that. Wendy did.
Okay. Okay, so I'll have all of those links down below. Yeah, this was good. I think this was super helpful. Any final words, anything?
No, this was really great to go through this with you, Brad. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
For sure. Until next time, be sure to share it. Please leave a review. That's super helpful. Share it, like it, depending on the platform you're watching or listening on. Share it with all your friends. Leave a review. Until next time, thank you for listening. See you next time. Thanks for listening, watching, wherever you're consuming this. I'm your host, Bradley Martin, and this is Clearing the Way, a resource for small business owners.